Good morning and welcome to an impromptu video that I am filming because I have a very hard time to postpone talking about a topic that I feel passionate about, and the reaction video that I want to film today, I feel very passionately about it. I've been like thinking about everything I want to say since yesterday evening, and I even wrote it down, and it rarely happens to me that I write shit down that I'm going to say on YouTube. Now I'm going to start doing my makeup. I'm sort of going to show the products that I'm going to use on camera so that you can follow a little bit what's going on, but I'm also not going to like stop and explicitly tell which each product is going to be so that I don't lose my trail of thought. Now, I did not write down what this video was a reaction to on purpose because I just can't be bothered with internet trolls. So the reaction that I'm filming to is in response to a video that our beloved Marlena, the owner of former brand Makeup Geek, posted not too long ago in the distant past, maybe last week, and I watched it only yesterday because I had the feeling that video was going to like get under my skin and irritate me, and it did. So I wanna preface this by telling you very shortly what my history with Marlena is, because I have a very intimate history with Marlena and Makeup Geek. Marlena basically single-handedly ignited that passion and love that I have for makeup now 10 years ago. It's been now 10 years ago. It's 2023 and I got into all of this in 2013. I have always been such a huge fan of her approach, her very like down-to-earth personality. I was so on board when she made Makeup Geek, and I've always been a huge supporter of her, you know, endeavors. So overall, I've always had a very positive relationship with Marlena. So this is not coming from a place of, you know, me having some sort of a grudge against a woman. However, I will also say this is not the first time she makes comments about the, you know, what happens on the backside of the industry behind closed doors that makes me question her competence, if I'm being completely honest. Our first incident dates back to quite a few years ago. Hold a gun to my head, I can't remember when exactly it was, but she made a video already at the time that she was, I think, in the industry, like on the back end of the industry, making her own products, that she went on a rant about Tarte blushes. And I can't really remember the context of why she was saying all of that. Possibly it was because she was releasing her own blushes, so she was making comments about, you know, other people's blush formulations. And she basically said that there was a chemical in the Tarte blushes that was toxic. And then she proceeded to say, can you believe that, coming from someone who, by that point, should have had a basic understanding of cosmetic chemistry. She says, if you can't pronounce the name of a chemical, it's probably bad for you. I will blend out my Auric Glow Lust and let you ponder on that for a second, let it sink in, because that is one of the most ridiculous things to say, one of the most ridiculous claims that I've ever heard, and usually it comes from people who want to partake in fear-mongering. And when you hear that coming from someone who has started to see, you know, what happens on the other side of the business, you know, has a bit more of an idea about cosmetic formulations, it is just unacceptable to be making claims like this. Plenty of people would struggle to tell you what hydrogen dihydrogen oxide is, or would struggle to pronounce it, and yet it is essential to our everyday life because it is commonly known as water. So that is a ridiculous argument to make. I think anyone with the smallest amount of common sense will tell you how ridiculous it is to make remarks like this. So after she made that remark, I went ballistic on her in the comments, and she actually responded, and we had this little like sort of argument online. Didn't turn me off of her or the brand. I thought, okay, you know, the woman is a little bit naive, maybe she needs to learn about the industry, whatever. I gave her a pass and I continued to support the brand. And then a couple of days ago she releases this video which is called something in the lines of 7 things that the industry doesn't want you to know, or whatever, something in those lines. You can look it up and watch it. And after having watched the video, the first thing that came to my mind was, dude, it's 2023. none of the points that you made, none of the things that you said were a revolutionary, game-changing, or things people didn't know about. If you had made this video in 2010, you might have blown some people's minds, you know, with all of your background knowledge and behind the curtains, you know, intel. But in the year of 2023, with the abundance of information, with how proactive we have become in knowing what's happening, and, you know, just the world being a place where there's very little left to the imagination anymore, unless you want to like walk around with your curtains closed. That's a completely different story. She treated the whole topic as if she were telling stuff that is like extremely controversial, nobody wants you to know them, it's all like hush hush, and literally none of the things she said were that. Except for maybe the last point, that last thing she talked about, I had literally never heard about it. So one of the things that Marlena said, and it's been, you know, something that circulates around the internet quite often, is that products which have the same ingredients, she went on this like whole story of how there are a certain amount of labs in the world that make certain types of products, and if something comes from the same lab, it is very likely that it's the same product, even if they're completely differently priced, because the most of the production costs are not at making the product itself, but all the spiel that comes after it. And yes, I can agree that probably the production of the product itself is a certain amount of the cost, and then there's a lot involved further, depending on whether you're going to make expensive packaging, have an expensive marketing campaign or not. But then she goes to say, and that counts for so many of the things she said, they just sounded so naive and uninformed that my mind was blown. I was like, dude, how can you say these things after having been on the back end for so long? It is embarrassing for you to be saying these things. So one of the comments she made was, obviously, that because of all of that, sometimes when you compare ingredient lists of products that are sold at the drugstore and high-end, they most likely were made at the same lab, they most likely are the same product, you're just paying a different price for that. And I thought that in the year 2023 we had killed that rumor, we had like stomped it like a cockroach, because it is not true. It's not true, okay? Even if two products have the same ingredient list, first of all, the order may be different, the composition in terms of the percentages of, you know, certain chemicals versus others could slightly differ. But most of all, I'm sure that raw materials also come from different sources, and these different sources probably have slightly different quality. Now, I can't tell you because I've never been on the back end of the cosmetics industry. I wish I had. If I had a chance at a do-over, I might actually have become a cosmetic chemist, knowing that I would be so passionate about makeup. That's a completely different story. Anyway, so say you like meat. Tell me that beef you bought from the supermarket, which has the exact same ingredient composition as meat that you might have bought at the butcher, is of the same quality. To me, same chemical composition does not equate same product, simply because there is such a thing as raw material quality. Just like with beef. Beef that I eat at expensive restaurants is not of the same quality compared to the beef that I usually buy from the supermarket and cook myself at home. Because there's also something to be said about how something is made. And on that note, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that products from the same categories will probably contain a lot of the same ingredients. That just makes perfect sense to me. Eyeshadows are always going to contain some version of mica, they're going to contain silicones, they're going to contain binders. That is, you know, not a mystery, I think, to anyone at that point. But that has nothing to do with the different types of formulations that you will come across on the market, even if the ingredients are the same. And I think that it makes perfect sense that certain ingredients work really well within these kind of formulations, and frankly, I don't foresee the day that we're going to see uranium in our eyeshadows. Yes, products have a lot of the same type of ingredients. And on that note, continuing in our, you know, train of thoughts, one of the next things she says is, groundbreaking, brand new information, nobody ever thought of that. Blush is basically a modified large eyeshadow. Is that a surprise to any of you? Please tell me that's not a surprise to any of you. And on that note, let me whip out my favorite blush formula, because then she proceeds to say that since a lot of blushes have the same ingredients, essentially all blushes are the same. So if you pick up a blush that works for you from the drugstore, you don't really have to pick up a luxury blush because they're basically the same thing. And yet, as a consumer, I've had a wildly different experience. I've used plenty of blushes from the drugstore. They're decent. But you know what? Blushes from the drugstore tend to look a little bit powdery. They do not have the same blending properties in my experience as some higher end formulas, and they do not have the same kind of longevity. Nothing has stayed on my face the same way that my pet blushes have. Yes, they're expensive. Yes, they're not for everyone. Yes, I'm sure that the drugstore makes beautiful formulas, especially because the drugstore has come a long way in the past years. But you cannot say that just because blush from the drugstore and blush from higher end brands contain the same ingredients, they're the same thing and they have the same quality. That is just disrespectful. Quality comes at a certain price. That's just, you know, that's life. Going to grab this oldie but a goodie to highlight. So I'm curious what your experience has been specifically with blush, because my personal experience with blush has been, wow, this is staying on my face for the whole day, mind fucking blown. And that has never happened to me with drugstore formulas. And I've tried quite a range. I've had Catrice blushes, I've had Essence blushes, I had Milani Luminoso, and honestly, the Milani baked blushes, some of the absolute most top-notch drugstore formulas out there. Although, I cannot stress this enough, Milani in Europe is not at drugstore pricing. I remember buying my Luminoso blush in 2000 and I want to say 16 or 17, you know, at the height of Luminoso being super popular because of Nikki tutorials, and it was not cheap. It was like 14 or 15 euros. So that also comes at a certain quality. Even at the drugstore you have tiers of quality. Now let's talk about eyeshadows. And you know that one is going to get under my skin real quick because I'm so partial and so subjective. But at one point she was talking about eyeshadows that, you know, they're all basically the same thing. So why would you go out and buy a Pat McGrath palette? The Pat McGrath palette, the only thing that is special about it, according to Miss Marlena, is the outer component, the fact that it has Pat's name on it. Matte formulas in particular, between the drugstore and higher end brands, are incomparable. Natasha Denona mattes, Pat McGrath mattes, you know, I haven't tried Charlotte Tilbury, but I would assume they're also really good mattes. A good matte in the higher, like, luxury price category cannot be compared to a matte eyeshadow from Essence or Catrice or NYX. I'm sorry, it just cannot. Metallic eyeshadows, on the other hand, I would argue metallic eyeshadows are relatively easy to make, pigmented and beautiful. Even at the more drugstore level, we see so many like indie brands making beautiful blinding metallic eyeshadows that are very comparable in quality to Pat McGrath or Natasha Denona. However, FYI, because I think it might be interesting for you, I am going to be dipping back into my Glam palette from Natasha Denona because it has been an absolute hot minute since I have used that palette, and now is the time of the year when I can still use it. I think it is extremely unprofessional to basically say that a mothership palette from Pat McGrath is nothing more than luxury black packaging, because not all formulations are even offered at the drugstore. There are formulations in the higher end tier that you will probably, or I personally have not come across at the drugstore tier. For example, baked gelée formulas. Extremely popular as of, you know, late, offered by a variety of higher end brands. Really impeccable formula, probably all coming from like 1 or 2 labs around the world, or maybe that one lab in Italy, I don't know. I would fucking like go on a pilgrimage to that Italian lab that makes these formulations because they feel sacred to me. And I can only imagine that these baked gelée formulas are just expensive to make, because from what I have seen, they are only offered at the higher tiers. They are offered by, I don't know, Tom Ford, Bobbi Brown, Pat McGrath Labs, you know, they're offered at that level. I've never really seen a beige gelée formula offered at the drugstore. MAC has a beautiful beige gelée formula. The baked formulas, like just the dome ones, yes, we have seen those. I've seen those from the Body Shop, although I don't know whether the Body Shop's really drugstore. I've seen those from Milani, I've seen those from KIKO. And I have to say though, like both KIKO and Milani, in my opinion, in terms of like pricing, are more like mid to higher end drugstore. Okay, they're not cheap. So there are certain type of formulations that are obviously expensive to make, they are higher quality, and they are only offered by the higher end brands. And yes, a mothership contains a couple of those extremely unique formulations. So a mothership, I'm sorry Marlena, is of much higher quality than your Makeup Geek eyeshadows, as beautiful as those were. Oh, just to tell you what I've been doing. So I put this eyeshadow through my crease. I think I'm going to push this one now into my lashes. And I'm probably going to put this one on my lids and this one in my inner corners. Like these eyeshadows here, the metallics here, are probably my favorite metallics in this eyeshadow palette. But that's, you know, on a side note. Then she made a comment about the fact that we've all bought that really expensive, you know, luxury eyeshadow quad and been sorely disappointed by the lack of pigmentation. And I think that is another very invalid point to make, because I'm sure that when brands design their products, they don't just go for more is more kind of mentality. Brands usually have this thing which is called a marketing department. They always go with pre-knowledge of their target customer, you know, group for them to successfully sell their product, you know. And I'm sure the average, I don't know, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old who is more conservative, who can afford to buy Dior and Chanel quads. I mean, that has obviously changed a lot in the past. Everyone's buying those quads, but I'm just trying to make a point here. I'm sure those women probably aren't looking for blinding triochromes Cliona style, because they just lead a different life. They have different needs. They don't need a punchy, blinding metallic eyeshadow. They need something more subtle. So brands respond to that need and make eyeshadows for them that are more subtle, because those are the ones that are going to sell. The average indie makeup user, the one who wants all the bling bling and blind blind, is probably not going to be buying Chanel quads. So, you know, you have to know your market in order to sell your product. So it is not surprising to me that you will oftentimes buy expensive, you know, eyeshadow formulas, like luxury eyeshadow formulas, and the pigmentation would be lacking there. That's, I think, by design. And one thing that I actually just opened my notes and I forgot to say, so we're going to have to like track back to when I was talking about blush, and that basically blush is a ginormous eyeshadow and that they're all the same. There is also such a thing as color subtleties. I'm sure that we can all agree that no one wants to whack on a really pigmented bubble pink eyeshadow on their cheeks, for the most part, because it will probably just be too much. And I think where a lot of like drugstore brands will give you extremely basic colors like a pink, an orange, you know, these like very standard colors, it takes a little bit more than that to formulate a really flattering color, because there's one thing to create a powder of a certain color, and it's a completely different set of skills to create a powder that looks flattering on the cheeks as a blush, because a baby pink is not going to look very flattering because it's just a very unnatural color. So I think that there is something to be said not only about the quality of the powders themselves, but also about color subtleties and a lot of thought being put behind the specific undertones, the balance between the different you know, pigments in the powder that will create a natural flush on the cheeks across different skin tones. Also an important point. I'm going to take this really beautiful pink now to put in my inner corners, and then actually we're going to do a little bit of a layering because I'm feeling like something sparkly on my lids as well. So the last point she made is one that I have never heard before. This is the first time that I hear this rumor circulating, so I don't know where it comes from. I don't exactly, you know, have the background on it, but she said that one of the biggest reasons she avoided putting talc in her eyeshadows is because there could be traces of asbestos in talc. And she says explicitly that she doesn't want to partake in fear-mongering, and yet this whole statement sounded like classical fear-mongering to me. Classical, oh, we can't put preservatives in our makeup because it causes cancer. Now, I will say this, I haven't really put enough time into researching this in order to tell you that, but I have 2 points to make here. Before I make those points, I'm going to apply a little bit of lavendering all over my lid. First of all, there is something to be said about the quantities that are present of certain toxic chemicals in everyday life. You know, if they're below a certain amount, even if they're present, they're probably not going to be, you know, harmful. So I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about that. Also because if you're worried about toxic ingredients being out to get you in modern life, then by all means you should probably off yourself tomorrow, because everything out there is out to get you. And yet people aren't massively dying of asbestos poisoning. If anything, I think the fumes we're breathing from, you know, cars are probably a lot worse than whatever traces there may or may not be of asbestos in talc. On my lower lash line, I'm basically going to run this like smoky brown shade here to complete the look, and also sort of complete this rand, because I think these were all the points that I wanted to touch upon. I didn't really watch the video a second time and make notes in case there were other remarks that I wanted to address. I think for the most part I covered the topics that, you know, stood out to me the most and bothered me the most. I'm curious what your take on all of this is. Have you watched the video? What did you think of the claims that she made? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. Alright, I am back. This is the final look. I have left the door a little bit ajar behind me because our orange friend was just attempting to make a break-in, so I need to protect my ladies. On my lips I have Pink Ultraness from Pat McGrath, another product that I haven't really used in a hot minute, and such a beautiful vibrant lipstick. Adore it. I don't know why I had forgotten all about it, but I'm very happy that today I also managed to make use of a couple of products that I haven't really pulled out for in a while. I hope you found this video interesting. I would be curious to hear your thoughts. I am always, you know, open to being wrong about things, so I would like to hear your thoughts if you have any counter arguments, or if I made statements that you think were, you know, dumb or naive. Like I said, always open to a discussion. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!